Hello everyone, Blademaster here, and welcome to my presentation for this year's FEE3 2023. Just like last year, I will be presenting my project FE5AD, otherwise known as the Thracia 776 Remake for Game Boy Advance. In this video, unlike last year, I will just be going over some of the differences between this hack and the original Thracia 776 for Super Nintendo. One thing we'll start off with right away is what happens when you try and start the game. In this hack, there are three difficulties. Easy mode, which replicates the Paragon mode from the original game. In the original game, you normally had to input a code to do so, or to unlock a Paragon mode, that is, but this time around you just have to select easy mode. Normal difficulty uses some of this. Normal difficulty is a normal difficulty for the game. Promoted enemies having 3 auto levels, I believe, is the standard for normal mode in GBA games. I know I did tweak it a tiny bit, but difficult mode, which hasn't been finished yet, or really even worked on too much, has 10 auto levels for promoted enemies, which is, I believe, the default for GBA Fire Emblem, and then enemy items change as well. Now, when you start the game this time around, unlike the demo I showed last year where you started at Chapter 1, this time around things are different, and you start in the Prologue, which is known as Leonster's Fall. Leonster's Fall I will only show bits and pieces of, because I'll leave it to be more of a surprise for when people actually play the game. But this prologue just serves to cover the content of the opening demo from the original game, along with the short story which can be read on Serenus Forest, known as Leonster's Fall. The original short story is a novel and is quite long, so I did my best to really only capture most of the most important moments as it ties into the opening demo. And with that said, let's take a quick little preview at the actual content of the prologue. So what we have right here is a little preview of the prologue chapter. So the prologue chapter, which currently doesn't have a time limit, the last turn being there is a glitch, which will be pretty easy to fix, is just that it's an escape map. You get Finn, Lachesis, Ava, and Alvar, who are Lachesis's guards from FE4 Chapter 2. You get Young Leaf, who's just kind of here for story purposes, and then you have Young Glade and Young Rhinecock. Rhinecock is not really a new character. If you know your Thracia 776, you'll know who he is, but why he's there is just one of the smaller additions for the story of this hack. So this chapter is an escape mission. You just have to pretty much beat this boss and escape there. It's just trying to replicate the escape that Finn and Lachesis go through in Fall of Leonster. You get a game over if most of these units die, but for this chapter, the only thing you have to do is have Finn, Leaf, and Lachesis escape. And if you have other units like Glade or Rhinecock or Ava or Alvar escape, you'll get bonuses and stuff during the story. But if you don't have them do anything, in that regard, you won't get the bonuses, and in some cases you might get a penalty. So if Ava or Alvar die, you don't get a game over like the others, but if both of them die, you don't get to recruit Jean in the next chapter. So, as some people may or may not remember from last year, Jean is a playable character in this hack. She was an unused character in the original Thracia, and she'll join you in Chapter 1. So that's kind of all we're going to go over for the prologue this time. On to Chapter 1. So here we have Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is pretty similar to what it was last year. There aren't too many changes, some new mugs for some of the characters compared to last year. but otherwise it's been largely unchanged. We added a door and the ability to get a door key if Ocean visits this village, so that if you want Ocean to take part in the chapter, we don't know yet how hard this chapter might be in hard mode when compared to the original game. You're able to just have him get in there, open the door, and contribute to the combat. Personally, I think most people are going to end up just saving the door key, but maybe I'll be proven wrong. One other thing to note about this chapter is Avel. So normally in Thracia 776, Avel is invincible during these chapters, but now she has a protection marker on her. That's because if by some chance she dies, which is extremely unlikely, as you can see, you get a game over now. And the reason we did that is because the immortality skill, it's too overpowered, and it's just better to just tell the player up front, yeah, this person will die. People die when they're killed, and we have to pay homage to that. That being said, one of the other things about the enemy AI in this game is that they don't ever try and capture you anymore. To me, it's possible to add in the ability for the AI to capture you. You're able to do an AI that always uses lunge and stuff like that. But in this case, it's just a bit silly, because when the AI tries and captures you, it's essentially just a weaker way of them killing you without actually killing you. And it's just more of a smack in the face than an actual serious threat. So, that's just been done away with. Another thing to note about the enemies is that, thrones are weaker this time around. They gave 10 defense and 30 avoid before. Now they just give 5 defense and 15 avoid. That's part of a general trend of trying to just, lower the defense and avoid of tiles, but keeping them kinda at Thracia levels. Another thing of note is supports have been, changed, obviously. One example is how Ocean and Halvin now support each other. But not only that, compared to last year's video, support bonuses have been nerfed a bit. One other thing to mention is in regards to skills. So skills in this hack use combat arts. Like Sun God's Wrath, everyone has Mercy, but combat arts, you can't double with combat arts, but some of them have exceptions. So some characters like Dagdar, for example, will have Mercy Plus, which allows you to double even though it's a combat art. Otherwise, you just have, stuff like Leaf's, adept skill. And one other thing to mention that we'll try and implement a bit more of is just generic combat arts. Marty has this skill called Smash, which I believe was inspired by Helm Splitter from Three Houses, I think is the game it's in. I don't think it's in Echoes. This just gives them some extra might and hit with the Steel Axe. We might do a couple more skills, combat arts like this, but we'll see what happens with that. So one other thing that I'll mention in regards to, which I talked about last year too, I believe, but I'll bring it up here again, is when you fight a boss, there are 3 things you can do. You can kill them, capture them, or capture them and release them. So depending on what you do will have a different effect with different bosses in the game. So in Weissman's case, if you kill him, he's dead. If you capture him and release him, he'll show up as a boss again later in the chapter. Obviously, you capture him, beat him, and he's just insulted by you, and he just wants his revenge. And if you capture him and hold on to him, he'll give you an item, and then he'll just go away and live happily ever after. So, depending on how you treat bosses, you could get different things from them. So that's it for Chapter 1. Let's move on to our preview of Chapter 2. So for Chapter 2, the changes, again, aren't really all that big. One thing of note is that Ronan and Tanya too, and Marty as well, they have boosted stats. Because one, we don't know what the difficulty of the game is going to be like just yet, with enemies being slightly stronger, and it wasn't so much to buff Ronan to make him or even Marty or Tanya to make them better. It's just trying to incorporate for, what the end game could be, given that stats are a bit different now. Avel's another example. Normally she just has capped skill and speed at 20 because 20 was the cap in that game. Now she has 30 for skill and speed, you know, because that's what the new cap for the Swordmaster is. But one thing of note about Ronan is he joins with a new healing item called the Small Fish. The Small Fish are items that you'll be able to see as you play through the game, and you can use them to heal or they can be sold. The Small Fish is really more for healing than anything else. But you know, if you get one of the bigger fish, then you could sell that for money if you don't want to use it to heal yourself. One other thing I just kind of want to briefly go over is dismounting. So when you dismount now, you just keep the same weapons you have, which is why Finn is able to use this axe reaver, so that he still kind of has a sword for you know, all intents and purposes, even though it's a lance. And just like how Dagdar also has a new weapon, the Fire Sweep Axe, this is taken from Heroes, so you know, you're able to like see that there are going to be some things that change things up a bit. One other thing about Dagdar is that the charge skill, as far as I know, it isn't possible to implement it in GBA Fire Emblem, or at least no one has tried to. So the charge skill was removed and replaced with Savior, so you can capture or, you know, rescue people without any kind of penalty. One of the things about this boss, Buck, so in the previous chapter I mentioned how, you know, if you with Weissman, different things will happen depending on what you do. In Buck's case, if you capture him, he'll show up later on in chapter 4 as an NPC, or, you know, if you release him, he'll send you fish later on. You know, so chapter 2 is largely the same. There are just some little differences here and there. That being said, let's move on to chapter 2X. So chapter 2X is also pretty similar to how it was in the original game. The main thing that's different this time is that you know, I decided not to go with Thracia fog, and the reason I did that is because, one, even though you can disable it, you can open the mini map and just see what the map looks like. Another thing you can just do in this modern era of technology is just look up what the map's design looks like online, and it's just, you know, trying to reduce like unnecessary tedium in an era where it's like no longer really needed. You know, and I can understand if some people think that's poor design on my part, but you know, that's just what I felt like doing in this case. So one thing I'll mention here, I mean, I'm going to remove the fog really quickly. So if we remove the fog, you'll see that Shiva is here. So for Shiva, the reason I'm bringing him up is because normally if you kill Shiva or capture him and release him, like, bad things can happen. In this case, if you capture Shiva and you don't release him, there's just a little cutscene where like Leaf meets him and like Safi saves him, and you know, he doesn't join you, but you know, since Leaf meets him, like if you do that, Leaf can now also recruit him in chapter 7. You know, so that's just like one little nice thing that's been added in. Another nice thing that's been added in, there's gonna be a brief cut. As I was saying, the next thing I'm going to show you is in regard to capture. So if you try and capture a unit, you always will kill them. So right now, Dagdar does 3 damage, can't hit Lifis to save his life. Excuse me again. You know, but if you just throw a hand axe, you know, at him and try and capture him, you know, you just always do it because he doesn't have an item equipped. So that's kind of how we tried to replicate that from the original Thracia. One thing I forgot to mention, and this applies to chapter 1 as well, is Leaf and Abel can talk, and if they speak, they get a support bonus. You know, it's a very small one, but like they'll go from C support to C plus support. There's some other little bonuses like that for certain characters, like in chapter 1 if Tanya and Ocean speak to each other, they get a bonus to their support, while if Dagdar and Avel speak to each other in chapter 1, they get a vulnerary. I just forgot to mention that before. So you know, that's it kind of for the differences for chapter 2X. It's largely pretty similar. And now we'll move on to chapter 3. So chapter 3. So one thing I also forgot to mention chapter 2X is in regards to Lithis. Lithis normally only joins you if you capture him and don't release him. And if you do release him in the original game, he pretty much just insults you and calls you an idiot. If you have Leaf and Avel talk to each other in chapter 2X, Avel essentially tells you like capture him and hold on to him. But this time around, there's some slightly different things in regards to that. So when it comes to Lithis, if you capture and release him this time around, he won't join you in this chapter, but he will join you in chapter 4. And if he joins you in chapter 4, he won't have his support with Safi, and he won't be able to recruit Dhalsim even if you visit the village. It'll be like he just joins you fresh without any memory of him having already been part of your army for a little bit of time. He also won't have any of his items if you captured him and released him without taking control of that. That being said, in regards to chapter 3, we make Choir Pri be a priest. That's what he normally is. Even though he's a priest, he's not recruitable. It's just that he's a priest because he's a bit older than the other kids here, and because, you know, that's what his class is originally. This bishop does still use the door key and chest key to get that meteor tome, just like last time. In the original game, you let him get the meteor tome this time though, and he'll end up attacking the children in here, which is kind of funny, but it adds to the sense of urgency in some respects to like rescue them faster before they just go away forever. Even though he's in range, he won't move to attack them. His AI isn't set to do that. And then, like in the previous chapters, depending on what you do with Lobos, you know, you get different events to happen. And I believe that's it for changes to this chapter. This chapter is also very similar to how it was in the original game. Not much is different other than, you know, some of the enemies having slightly better stats. And with that being said, let's move on to chapter 4. And now we're at chapter 4. So chapter 4 has changed a lot more than some of the previous chapters. For starters, you have Karen, who's a Pegasus rider, and she has no equipment, but she can only use lances as a Pegasus rider. Normally she's able to use swords, but now she's only able to use lances. A bigger change though is if you manage to recruit Jean, she joins you during these chapters, and she can help, you know, heal you know, your units, and hopefully make the monster arc a bit easier. There's also a time limit on how long you have to escape now. One of the reasons why there's this time limit is because it's kind of silly for, like, if you've beaten the chapter, you know what's like behind this gate, and it's like they're just there while this whole event is going on and they don't do anything. You know, some of the enemies changed. These are on dismounted Axe Knights. You'll see dismounted mounted units show up sometimes. One of the things we did also, this enemy drops a door key. They did that to help speed the chapter along. Chests in this chapter are normally randomized based off the items that your units carry with you. This time around, like in the original game that was the case, this time around these chests always contain the same items, and they always contain the same items regardless of the equipment that, Jean, Leaf, Lithis have, regardless of what they had, you know, going into this chapter, because they lose all their equipment at the start of this chapter. Then you have Brighton. Brighton can only use axes now because he's an Axe Knight, but he comes with a Sword Reaver to help you against enemies with swords. The other big change is that you recruit Daisy instead of Laura, and the reason this was done was because when you go to chapter 12X, you can recruit Pern with a bunch of different characters, but you're always going to recruit Pern with Laura because that's the only way to get a dancer. So this time around, you recruit Laura as a dancer in chapter 12X, but you get Daisy as a thief. So this way you don't lose an extra thief, and then you can still get the dancer and recruit Pern, you know, with whoever you want, because he has a bunch of different people that can recruit him, and it's just like, oh, you know, this way you're not always recruiting him with the same person. The only other thing worth mentioning is that in addition to Dhalsim, there's another boss in here. It's the other Axe Knight You know, and that's kind of it as far as this chapter goes, and you know what's different about it, because compared to the other ones, this is one of the chapters with one of the bigger changes. And with that being said, let's move on to chapter 4X. So in chapter 4X, there are also quite a few changes. One of the changes is that you have these two NPCs who you can't recruit, who are just in these jails here. Originally, there was some thought about making these two be Ocean and Halvan, but at the end of the day, I decided against that. You know, giving Jean and these three, who we'll talk about in a bit, already seemed like enough of a, you know, kind of way to help make this part of the game a tiny bit easier. So if you manage to open the door and save these two, they just escape and give you items later on. Obviously, you have Ced. Ced just joins with kind of his end game stats, like how he has if, you know, you recruit him later in the game. This was done just because it's kind of easier to do it this way. You know, you have Asbel, who, you know, comes with the graphic caliber like he always did. The female Thunder Mage up here is now the boss of the chapter. You don't have to fight her, but you can fight her, you know, for the EXP if you'd like. So as mentioned, the last kind of big change for these maps is that these three NPCs, if they survive the previous chapter, they keep traveling with you. If you find them annoying, you don't want them, you can just talk to them with Lithis, and then, you know, they'll give you an item and leave. If you manage to keep them alive, you know, through all the Monster Arc chapters, they'll give you, you know, better rewards depending on the chapter you ask them to leave in. So, you know, that's kind of how it is. Leaf also has a new conversation. It says he'll talk to Asbel first, but he has a new talk conversation that he can have with Ced, where Ced gives him a door key. So that's just another thing that was done to change things up in this chapter. And I believe those are the biggest changes for that. So that being said, we're going to move on to chapter 5. Chapter 5 has also gone through some changes, mostly in the arena. You have these two new characters over here. They're not new characters, but they're other members of the Lop Church, like Veld is. You know, you get to see Veld and Raedric. Raedric right now can't use his Lop sword, but that'll be fixed in the future, obviously. So, you know, one of the things that's like changed a tiny bit in the story is more for gameplay purposes is just, you know, you have terrors from Valencia, and they mostly are just, you know, here for gameplay purposes to kind of mix things up and give you some new enemies to fight and things like that. But what's changed about the arena is that it's a bit harder. Like, Avel's gonna really like kill these enemies now, and it's a bit harder to kind of just keep Nana alive, and, you know, it lets you, you know, go through the events of what goes on in the arena, because as you kill more enemies, they all show up, and it all, you know, more carrot reinforcements show up, and it all leads to Marita showing up if you kill one person, and then Galza showing up if you kill another. Yeah, and those are kind of the main big changes for chapter 5. Like, some of the characters, if you let them live, like Weissman and Lobos, they'll show up in this chapter. This chest, if you've been following updates on FEU, was changed to have a scroll in it. But beyond that, yeah, the other thing is kind of changes some of the conditions to getting in. So Abel can't, if Abel dies in the arena, it's a game over. So, you know, you don't want her to die, and since enemies don't capture her, you know, you don't want her to die either. Pretty much the way to trigger the cutscene that makes Abel, you know, have what happens to her so that you can actually, you know, unlock this path and beat the chapters. Either you have to kill Marita when she shows up, or you have to open the door. Marita, when she shows up, she won't move for the first turn as long as Abel or Nana are in range. So for demonstration purposes, I'm just gonna have the event trigger that has, you know, Marita show up. You know, you have Nana, and she has Charisma. Charisma works as it does in Thracia, not as it does like in the default skill system. Abel's equipment is that she pretty much she gives all her equipment to the convoy, so you know, you never have to worry about whether or not you're gonna accidentally leave something with it, you know, with her on her person or not. She just dumps everything in the convoy, and then she just has this iron blade so that she can fight in the arena. So we're just gonna quickly, you know, get through this so we can get the cutscene where Marita shows up, and you know, here she is. And you know, Marita, she can't be like, normally you can do something where you can capture Marita, but this time around, you know, you can't do that. And she has the dazzle skill, so that so in the original Thracia, if units support each other and they attack each other, they don't counterattack. So Marita, you know, if she attacks Abel, Abel won't counterattack. And dazzle was put in to kind of replicate that, so it's not a universal thing. In regards to Luna, there are certain enemies that are supposed to have combat arts, and for right now, the plan is that, you know, we'll try and implement it so that certain combat arts enemies will always try and activate. But as of right now, you know, she won't activate Luna if she attacks. So I believe that's all I have to show for Chapter 5. As things stand, either this chapter or Chapter 6 is going to be all the demo will go up to. The demo is going to be released very shortly after this video is. So if it does have Chapter 6, that's great. If not, it's only going to go up to Chapter 5 and include the prologue. So that's about it for this year's FEE3 video. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.